After heavy Russian airstrikes started, Ukraine is retaliating with drone attacks and artillery attacks, and since then, both sides continue to trade massive blows on the respective hinterland. At the same time, the front remains somewhat stable, while we can still record additional Russian gains over the last roughly 1.5 weeks. We also have more indications from Putin, from the political sphere, that a political solution, a negotiated solution that is any more than a capitulation by Ukraine, seems to be impossible. This and more in this situation report. Russia has conducted massive airstrikes over the last days, at times with up to 90 Shahid loitering munitions, up to 10 Kinshal, 70 KH-101, 555 or 55, 12 Iskander M, 3 Caliber. So we see a massive usage of precision munitions by the Russians that has not been seen in months or in many months. At the same time, we see images like this appearing. This is supposedly showing a Kinshal that was shot down or failed, that is crashing here into the water in Kiev. Ryan Macbeth on his YouTube channel did an analysis. According to him, it was something very heavy, so a Kinshal is actually an option that it crashed in this regard. At the same time, Russians have shown innovations, which we can see here. We have the we see a cruise missile flying here, dispersing flares, obviously to deflect infrared guided anti-air in mostly shoulder fired manpads probably, but also Ukraine has now, with NASAMS, with IRIS-T, has systems that can fire infrared guided missiles at these cruise missiles, and now they have modified them in this way, which we can see here in a shot down or crashed one. Those are supposedly the dispensers. The exact system is unknown as of yet. We do not know whether they are being periodically just being dispersed over the whole time, or whether they are being dispersed at specific points, or whether they even have sensors. There are no exact details here as of yet, but we see the Russians doing innovations. Ukraine responded in the night from the 29th to the 30th with air attacks, with more than 70 drones, according to them, in targets at close to Moscow, Belgorod, Tula, Tver, and Bryansk. Russia says they shot down a couple of drones, several dozens actually, but there are reports of explosions on the ground. So it seems that at least some of the drones made it through the Russian air defense. At the same time, Russia has flown other attacks, some of them 36 Shaheeds, and up to 120 missiles, among them 90 KH-101, KH-555, and KH-55. Again and again, we see huge waves of attacks by the Russians. Ukraine has then responded again with attacks on Donetsk, and in Belgorod, it attacked targets in the city of Belgorod, where numerous civilian casualties are being reported, as well as obviously are in Ukraine. Both sides are increasingly mentioning higher numbers of civilian losses with those attacks. At the same time, the GOR said that Russia has produced in October 115 long-range missiles. That means that this one strike with 120 used up more than a month's production, if the GOR is correct. And right now, before those strikes, Russia supposedly had roughly 1,000 long-range precision missiles in their inventory. If we take the production numbers the GOR mentioned and what the GOR said that the Russians have still in stocks, and add them to each other. At the same time, we see that right now, every single strike the Russians do is more or less using up a month's supply. So they will probably not be able to continue this for much longer as of now. They might be able to do another 4 or 5 strikes like this, but the rest of their missiles will probably have to be kept in reserve, at least if the numbers supplied by the GOR, the Ukrainian military intelligence, are correct. At the same time, the Ukrainians are reporting that Russia has fired 7,400 missiles, precision long-range missiles, and 3,700 Shahid on them on Ukrainian territory. Among those were 2,470 S-300, S-400. So we see a huge number of SAM systems missiles being used in a ground-to-ground role. 900 Iskander-M and 48 Kinshal were used, and Ukraine claims that from the 3,700 Shahid, they shot down 2,900, but that still leaves 800 of those cheap loitering munitions making it through. Let's go to the Eastern Front. We have movement along several parts of the front line, but in most regards, it's somewhat limited. We have, for instance, reports here at Ivanivka that the Ukrainians managed to recapture that part. I'm not going to go into much details about the changes here, as over the last 1.5 weeks, I have more or less taken a vacation, so I have not followed every single change. The overall look is that the Russians gained some additional ground, which I will mention where I can confirm it. We have some attacks here in the south, also close to Dnipro, that were successful here close to, we have some successes at Novye Horivka. Here in this area, the Russians were successful. We have some geolocalization here right to the southeast. This area was taken by the Russians, so we do have some additional gains west of the Brova here as well, for instance, where the Russians advanced. They're also keeping up the pressure on Spirny. Some claims are that Spirny has fallen to the Russians. That is unclear as of now and unconfirmed, but we do know that the Russians managed to advance here at Bodanivka, especially here on the ridgeline. They managed to push forward and are now on the flank of the town, as well as they have entered in the northeast. They are fighting in these areas as well. As of now, we don't really know how far they have been successful, but we see additional gains in those directions. Additional gains are also being reported in the area here south of Andrivka. The Russians managed to push forward here along the western side of the railway yard. Additional gains here as well. But overall, while the Ukrainians lose some positions over the last 1.5 weeks, the overall situation hasn't changed dramatically. Let's switch over to Avdiivka. Here we have some additional gains here in the north, and especially important northwest of Stepove. We have additional losses for the Ukrainians. They have lost areas here in this regard. Other than that, the Russians are probably have been more successful in the area here, where there are dachas right east of the coke plant. And in the south, there are some reports of Ukrainian losses or loss in territory or Russian gains in this area here. But again, overall, we're talking about maybe 200-300 meters over the last 10 days, more or less. So no dramatic change. At Marinka is now fully confirmed to be under Russian control, and they seem to have gained some positions in Heorhivka. So in this town here, this town is reaching up to the outskirts of Marinka, and they have entered the first buildings in the easternmost part of this town as well. Further south, we do not see much change at all. There's fighting around Novo Mikhailivka. The Russians are pushing from 3 sides, pressuring towards the town. They have entered into the town itself, but the fighting is continuing here. Obviously, this will threaten the supply line towards Vuhledar, where the main supply line is going up here, the main line of communication. Should the Russians advance further here, the situation in Vuhledar will become difficult. I cannot record any serious change here south of Velika Novosilka. In the area of where the 2 oblasts of Donetsk and Zaporizhia meet, south of Orikhiv, we have a significant loss by the Ukrainians, where they more or less lost that whole area here between Novoprokopivka and Verbove. Here they were pushed back. There's some speculations that the Ukrainians might have withdrawn to better positions to defend their gains over the coming winter. This might be true. This might also just be sugarcoating a loss on territory here. I can't really confirm. What I can confirm, though, that there's a new video from this very region which shows the Russians executing through 3 Ukrainian prisoners of war that are on their knees and have their hands raised, that are clear or the combat. So in this regard, another war crime being recorded here with a drone from another war crime committed by the Russians. On the Dnipro, No change again that can be recorded. Now there are claims that the Ukrainians plan to cross the Dnipro far earlier than they actually did and were stopped by the breach of or the explosion at the Novakhovka power plant here, which flooded the whole area and emptied the Kakhovka reservoir. In this regard, supposedly the attacks were supposed to happen at the same time or slightly before the main attacks in the east in Zaporizhia to draw in reinforcements. And we do know that after this whole area has flooded, Russians have redeployed units from this area towards Orikhiv that were able to help defend against the Ukrainians, which might otherwise have been fixed in place here. This turns out that the Russian destruction of the Kakhovka Dam, that this was likely for the Russian benefit in this regard if those claims are true. Generally, we have overall, we have estimates from the US that Russia has now lost 315,000 soldiers. Those are KIA, WIA, and MIA, so wounded, killed, and missing in action. And at the same time, according to the British Ministry of Defense, Russia is losing an additional 300 men daily on top of that. Overall, the Russian losses might reach 500,000 if it continues like this at the end of the year, but still the Russians are able to continue fighting. We have pictures here of the Russians painting aircrafts on the tarmac of airports. For what exact purpose is unclear, obviously to make fake targets. Whether the Russians know or expect the Ukrainians to use targeting software on drones that identifies by shape, by colors, or whether it's to make identification how many planes are there exactly at the very moment more difficult is unclear as of yet. But we see that the Russians put an effort there to actually paint planes on the tarmac to make it appear like there are planes in other positions as well. And there has finally been a new exchange of prisoners. Over 200 Ukrainians have returned home, among them 6 civilians. Interestingly enough, civilians are being exchanged in prisoner of war exchanges. That is exceptional, and obviously civilians shouldn't be taken prisoner of war to begin with. On the Black Sea, the Russians are reporting a fresh attack by the Ukrainians. 4 S-200 and 2 Neptune ASMs have been used, according to Russian mill bloggers. I cannot confirm it independently. The Russians claim the S-200, which are outdated air defense systems that have been repurposed by Ukraine in a ground-to-ground attack role, refurbishing old missiles, adding targeting software, targeting means, and thus using them to attack ground targets. Of those 4, 2 already crashed here into the sea. One crashed in open field or on the Crimean Peninsula, and one was shot down by the Russian air defense. And the Russians are also claiming that 2 Neptune passed by and disappeared southeast on the Black Sea, claiming that they don't know whether it was a mistake, an error in production, whatever, from the Ukrainian side of those missiles, or whether the electronic warfare has managed to make those crash or miss their targets. Unclear. As said, all of it Russian information. I cannot confirm any of them. And when it comes to troop generation, we have additional changes that we can see on the Russian side. According to Russian law, you can only be pardoned once. So if you've been a criminal and you've been pardoned and you commit additional crimes, you cannot be pardoned again. This is supposed to change now. A clear reaction to the pardons to a lot of criminals in the context of this war in the penal battalions, where convicts that have been pardoned are now committing offenses again, and Russia here clearly wants to use the opportunity to offer them another way out of the prison by using them along the front line again. Probably kind of makes sense, as those who survived probably have experience as well, and the new contracts will probably not just be 6 months, they might be longer at the same time. So Russia uses all its means to increase its recruitment. At the same time, we see that the Russia's production in defense material is increasing faster than expected. Russia, it shows that the sanctions meant to curb Russia's defense procurement have been mostly useless or not not effective to a degree, at least not as effective as the West has hoped. Russia is able to circumvent them by importing from North Korea, from China, from Iran, and by using proxies like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and other countries that then smuggle the goods they bought in the West towards Russia. At the same time, Russia's defense industry is responsible for 40% of the increase in GDP, while it's only 6% of the GDP in total, showing us how much the Russians increased their production. And according to this, Russian newswire TASS, which is a state-run or at least state-controlled news outlet, said on December 29th that the Russian Ministry of Defense claims the Russian armed forces have received 1,500 main battle tanks, 2,200 AFVs, 1,400 armored vehicles, 1,400 rocket artillery systems, and 22,000 drones in 2023. Those are obviously Russian numbers given to us, and they don't have to be true. They are, though, likely somewhat roughly in the right ballpark. As we've seen, the Russians, despite claims by others that they will run out of tanks very soon, we do see continued Russian usage of heavy weaponry and extensive usage as such. So the Russians are, at least to a certain degree, able to continue replenishing their losses. At the same time, we see fairly little amount of modern tanks, T-90Ms, for instance, being used along the front line, indicating that they might build a reserve there, but it might also be interpreted that they actually produce far less than they claim. As said, in the end, it's make-believe. In the end, you can choose which side you want to believe, which numbers you want to believe. As I at least can observe that the Russians are nowhere close to running out of armored vehicles at all, and that they definitely managed to refurbish and produce a sizable number. Whether that's enough, whether they are able to build reserves or not, is a different story. At the same time, Russia says they now have 640,000 kontraktniki. Those are contract soldiers, and they claim that 480,000 have signed in 2023. I said in the past, those numbers are likely rounded up. That's just the normal state of affairs, that you would not say it's actually 480, when it's more likely that the number is somewhat lower, but it's probably within 10% of the actual number. If we look at the number of losses that Russia is suffering, while we watch the number of troops they still have along the front line, they must have recruited close or not that far off from 500,000 in the past year. At the same time, Ukraine is saying they increased production as well. In 2023, they claim they produced 42 times more mortar grenades, 2.8 times more artillery grenades, and 5 times more APCs. Impressive increases, obviously, but then again, depending on which level they started. This is more than obvious and makes those numbers less impressive than they initially sound. If they only produce 10 APCs a year, then a 5-time increase might be nice in numbers when it comes to the increase, but 50 APC would be far too little for the Ukrainian needs overall. And it's clear that Ukraine will not be able to meet its demands for military equipment out of its own industrial efforts. In the political sphere, Putin had a conversation with a soldier in a hospital that was recorded and published, and there he says that the West is the enemy of Russia. Ukraine is basically just a puppet of the West, which is the real enemy. The West wants to partition Russia into 5 parts, and that means that the war in Ukraine becomes an existential war for Russia. At the same time, this means that negotiations with Ukraine are not going to be negotiations among equal partners. Putin believes that Ukraine is a puppet. It's not somebody who you're going to talk with. You're going to talk with the puppet masters if you want to negotiate. Another sign that Russia is nowhere close of accepting Ukraine's right of existence, which would be an essential conditio sine qua non for a negotiation to have any other resemblance than a capitulation. At the same time, he's basically telling the Russians that a long war is to come. This is not just a war about some towns at the outskirts at the border of Ukraine. It's a war against the whole West, showing that the effort that will have to be put in will be significant. And even he also mentioned that basically if Russia doesn't win in this, then all those sufferings has been in vain, that Russia will have to win this war. Again, basically admitting to a sunk cost fallacy. But in this regard, as of now at least, it seems increasingly likely that Russia's hopes that they can succeed in this war are at the very least not unfounded. We've talked about this in the past here. Ukraine can still win, but at this very moment, Russia seems to have the upper hand. International support is still coming towards Ukraine, though. Norwegian defense industry is now allowed to sell directly to Ukraine, but in the end, the Ukrainian government will still have to sign off on the contract. It's not like the Ukrainian state can just order whatever they want and it's going to be delivered. Norway's government will still have oversight over this. And at the same time, Norway declared they are going to send 2 F-16s to Denmark to help train Ukrainian pilots, that more of them get ready to enter combat as soon as possible. And Turkey is not allowing Great Britain to transfer 2 anti-mine ships, mine hunters, through the Bosphorus Strait. They are meant to be delivered to Ukraine to help with the mine threat and obviously to strengthen Ukrainian's navy. And Turkey is refusing because of the Montreux Convention, not allowing them to cross. At the same time, NATO now has ordered 1,000 Patriot missiles for the Patriot air defense system. Some of them will probably either be given to Ukraine directly or allow backfilling of missiles given to Ukraine to help keep Ukrainian air defenses alive. And that was already it from me for now. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. And tell me what you think. Where do you see Ukraine's chance of still winning this war? Leave a comment in the comment section. This channel is only possible because of the support of viewers like you. If you like to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. Thank you very much to everyone already supporting this channel. And that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching and I'll be back.